What's going on? Mike Nelson here. Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. On this podcast, we talk about all things to improve body composition, add more muscle, improve performance, do all of it without destroying your health in a flexible framework. Today on the program, we've got Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple, and we're talking all about common myths and misinformation about women's fitness. I think you will really enjoy this podcast. So we talk about everything from how do some of these misconceptions show up in women's fitness, what are some of the challenges with overcomplicated fitness programs, debunking the fasted training myths, understanding issues that are real issues, such as low energy availability. And then we talk about a wide range of topics such as cold water immersion and cortisol concerns. What are some of the different physiologic aspects of cold water exposure? Recovery modalities, training versus recovery. How do you find the right balance? Are there true sex-based differences in training? And even talk a little bit about the challenges in women's research and supplementation regarding women versus men. So I think you'll really enjoy this podcast. I had a ton of fun talking about this. It just appears like there's a lot of good stuff related to women's fitness online, and there's a lot of pretty darn horrible information, I would say. So it's nice to talk to someone who is a researcher in this field, who's very familiar with the research. And it's also fun for myself to compare notes, since ironically, my writing style is geared more to guys, but historically, 70% of the one-on-one online clients I have are actually women. And so we discuss that and compare notes about training and nutrition research versus what people do in the real world. So sponsors of this podcast, I'm drinking some, what is today? Watermelon Element, just still one of my favorite electrolyte drinks. I'll put a link down below. You can check out those guys there. And then in regards to training, check out my friends over at Beyond Power for the Voltra 1 device. I'm back at home again and was able to use this in the gym literally yesterday. And one of my favorite exercises on it is to do seated cable rows and then slowly increase the eccentric component over time. So what's great about the Voltra 1 device is you can add eccentric, you can add a chains mode, and it'll automatically change it. So as you're doing a seated cable row, for example, I was doing that concentrically, so pulling it back at 100 pounds. And then for my first set, I just added 10% more eccentric. So when it is pulling it back to the machine, it's 110 pounds. Since most of us are stronger on the eccentric component. And then over time, I have clients work up to even, maybe 40 or 50% on the eccentric load. Again, take your time on that. But I found that, strength increases, and overall, it's great to be able to do it with the device because you literally just program in how much of the eccentric load you want, how much of the concentric. And after the first rep, it'll auto-detect and it'll change it with each and every rep. So in my case then, I will auto-regulate that. If you can't hold the eccentric slow for 4 to 6 seconds, then it's probably a little bit too heavy for that rep range. So I'm an affiliate for Beyond Power. Really impressed with the device. I've had a couple friends pick up the device so far, and all the feedback on it's been amazing. Like they've all loved it and sent me notes on how they were excited that they are able to use it. So check that out below. And then also my newsletter. So I write daily for the Insider over at MikeTNelson.com. Go to the top, go to newsletter, and you can hop on for free. I'll send you all sorts of great information completely free. So thank you so much to Dr. Lauren, and enjoy this podcast all about debunking fitness. Hello, how are you?
Good. How's it going?
What are your kind of, if you were to pick one, I know there's probably many, what is like your biggest pet peeve that you hear about women's fitness now that just drives you nuts?
The theme is that it's way more complicated for women and that it's drastically different for women than it is for men. And so we can certainly go through the specifics of heart rate zone training or fasted training or sprint interval training or jumping or nutrient timing. There's tons. But the overarching theme is that because you are a woman or because you are a perimenopausal or postmenopausal woman, everything is different for you and much, much more complicated. There are so many more things that you need to worry about.
Yeah, before we hop into some of those, like, what would you say are the basics that we have pretty good data that probably both men and especially women should focus on? And then we'll get into maybe some of the other more specifics after that. What comes to my mind is I've seen things online or even had just one-off consult clients of this poor woman's program was so complicated that she was trying to train it around her specific cycle. And I just asked her, I said, well, I said, no offense, but like, what are you doing for exercise like right now? And she's like, well, I just gave up because it got to be so complicated. I tried to do it and I couldn't follow through it exactly. And I'm like, oh, well, we know we have lots of data showing exercise is still very helpful for women. But I get that it gets easy to get lost in the weeds and people generally are all or nothing. And then they're like, well, I can't really do it, air quotes, correctly. So I'm just gonna, it just doesn't seem to get done.
I think historically women have been sold ineffective exercise programs that
Yes.
encourage a lot of inconsistency, right? Like Monday, I'm going to do yoga, and then Wednesday, I'm going to do a cycling class, and then Friday, maybe I'll lift weights but it's always, or for 6 weeks, I'm going to do Barry's boot camp because it's really trending. And then I'm over it. And so I'm on to the next thing, like hot yoga, Pilates or something. And so then we never are really actually addressing the goal. And so you don't make progress. And then you get frustrated because you're not changing your body composition or improving your strength or whatever the goal is. There's no initial discussion as any good trainer would have with a client about why are we here, what are we looking to improve, and what looks like success.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably the most male clients I've ever had. Like, even though I write to dude bros in like their 30s to 50s, like most of my one-on-one clients are actually women. And one of the questions I get all the time is like, do I specifically train them any different? And I'd be curious on your thoughts on this is yes, but it's per individual. I haven't, I would say, found one particular thing that is vastly different between genders. I can make some associations where women probably could lift a little bit heavier, they probably could rest a little bit more, things like that. But at least based on the literature and my personal experience, I haven't found these massive, huge differences. Where I have found that, depending upon, well, what is their specific goal? What do they want to do? What are their constraints? What is their schedule? What is their outside stress? Like, to me, a lot of those things that you would take into to customize a program are still at the kind of the top of the list.
I completely agree. And I think if we go through the list of initial questions that you would ask a client or the key considerations that you might have, it would be initial fitness level. What is their background? What is their skill set? Certainly, what are their goals? How many days a week do they want to train? What are their preferences? What kind of access to equipment do they have? What are their past injuries? What exercises do they hate and love? And all of those things are, and then once you start working with someone, maybe you find that this person can handle a lot of volume. Wow,
Mm-hmm.
this person can squat 3 times a week. Like, that'll never be me, but that is some people. And that's what you get when you actually work with an individual. But making these kind of broad generalizations based on sex, I think don't get us anywhere. And they just ignore what we know about the foundations of good coaching, good coach client communication, and just the basics of a solid training program. We need consistency, we need progression over time. We need to do things with good form. We need to make sure we're challenging ourselves appropriately. And so insert something like cycle syncing. Well, even if there were a physiological rationale for doing that, which there isn't, but even if there were, implementing any program where you're drastically switching things up one week to the next would never make any sense for any goal. And so I think that gets really lost in these conversations because as soon as you start talking about hormones, you lose the conversation about exercise adaptation. It's like well established, like the things that nobody is debating about what we need for exercise adaptations.
Yeah, and many years ago, I did have some female clients that I tried the cycle syncing thing with and thought, well, hey, maybe it was more or less kind of their idea. And I'm like, okay, I'll go along with it. Let's try it. And it was a disaster, to be honest, because every discussion revolved around what part of their cycle were they in. They felt like they were not doing it correctly. And at the end of the day, I ended up abandoning it because, and part of it was my fault too. I probably didn't do the best job coaching them through it and got diverted into the weeds. And when I went back and looked at it, it's like, oh, well, you've missed 50% of your sessions. We're only doing 2 strength training sessions. We're only doing 1 cardiovascular. Like all the big things that I had in like everybody else's program, for one reason or another, might have been programmed, but at the end of the day, did not get executed. And then every conversation, when I went back and reviewed it, was, oh, okay, it's this time of the week. I did this temperature. Here's how I'm feeling. I'm going to change this or change that. And then something happened and it didn't really get done. So I ended up abandoning it because I realized I was doing people a disservice by getting them a worse result by unnecessarily complicating something that probably didn't need to be complicated.
Yeah, and I'll add two things. Having measured hormones and ovulation timing in so many people, it just never looks like this clean four
No,
week your
it's
hormones
very
are this
rarely
and then
ever
they're
that.
this. So and many people ovulate much earlier than mid-cycle and many people ovulate much later, meaning you have these unequal phase lengths, which makes the whole thing that much more complex and inappropriate for a lot of those individuals. And then, of course, it takes the autonomy away from can't we just wake up and get to the gym and then decide, am I feeling good? Do I want to push it today? And have that conversation with ourselves because certainly with the cycle syncing and also with a lot of the wearables, well, it told me I didn't sleep well last night.
Yeah.
So therefore, I'm not gonna. And when we start to lose that level of, hey, I'm able to decide how I feel and key into how I feel and then make decisions accordingly, or be okay with having a workout that is a B or a C and not an A plus. Like that's okay too. Doesn't mean it was worthless.
Yeah, I like the Dan John. Okay, most days are just what he calls like punch the clock workouts. Like you show up, you do the thing, like you do the best you can. You try to do high quality work. Maybe you rest a little bit longer to make up for it. Try to keep performance the main thing. But I think maybe social media or whatever has people thinking that every workout they do has to be the most amazing thing under the sun. And you talk to people who've done it for a long time, even people at an extremely high level, elite athletes, most of their sessions, shocker, are just, yeah, I got to the gym, I got the work done, I did the best I could. Obviously, things are trending down, you're going to make changes. But most of it is, like you said, it's like a B or a C. It's average or just a little bit above. And if you do that with violent consistency day in and day out, like, shocker, you can make a lot of really good progress.
And I find so many of the people who are worrying about all of this quote unquote optimization are not the folks that should be concerned about that because
Yeah.
they haven't been doing it for long enough. They don't have the basics nailed down. And so you have people who are worried about really insignificant things that maybe if you have an abundance of resources or you are an elite athlete and you really need that last 2%, then okay, let's do those things. But otherwise, you'd get a lot further if you just did the thing and stopped worrying about all of these nuances that at the end of the day aren't really going to move the needle one way or another.
Yeah. I do a lot of heart rate variability, and I really like wearables, but the two things that stand out to me are, like you said, It's probably a while ago now, conversation on a consult, and I could not get through to the guy of like, how did you feel when you woke up? Well, I looked at my aura and my aura score said this. I'm like, no, but like, just do me a favor. Next time you get up tomorrow morning, don't look at any metrics. Don't look at anything. Write down a note, just a 1 to 10 scale, like how you felt. Do that for a week. Then, by all means, look at your scores, whatever. I'll do another consult for free. We'll review your data and compare how you felt to what your data was. Because as like if you've been monitoring this data long enough, no matter what data it is, there's no one single marker that's going to tell you everything. As much as I love heart rate variability, I love other markers. And even then, over time, I've had clients do really good sessions on what would be horrible looking metrics.
Right.
But again, that was a one-off day. That was an acute thing. All their chronic measurements, everything were fine. Usually we've done something similar to this to the past. We have an idea of how they're going to respond, but there's no just one number is going to tell me exactly how I'm going to perform and feel. We're unfortunately so far away from that.
Yeah, and I think it's also, we're not robots, right? We're people.
No.
So even if everything was perfect on these wearables, what happens when you have a life stressor that can't
Yep.
be controlled? And we don't want to just throw away the opportunity to move forward in some way because of life things that happen. And for the vast majority of us, that those things do happen often every month. So it isn't like we can pretend that we don't have these sort of life stressors or preferences, or just we change our mind about things, or we're not as enthusiastic or motivated for whatever reason. And all of those things are going to just factor into the human side of training.
Yeah. I don't know if your experience was similar, but if doing my PhD, if I only exercised when my metrics were even okay to good, I don't think I would have done shit for 7 years. It's just like at some point you have to be like, okay, this is the base. I'm not going to go below. And yes, it is a stressor, but if I do F all nothing, that's going to be way worse than this acute stressor from exercise or cardiovascular training, etc.
There were large periods of time where I was like, I'm walking back and forth from the wet lab to the hospital to, and so I'm at least I'm doing something today, and that's
Yep.
like that's as good as it's gonna get. And that's okay too, right? Because I've
Yeah.
personally been lifting for long enough that I know I'll get back to it, but you just accept that phase where it can't be a priority, or other things are have to be a priority for your sanity, and then you come out the other side and you can prioritize exercise again.
Yeah. I had a membership on campus. I had a punch pass at another gym. I work part time for a med tech company. They had a gym. I had another gym membership, and I started converting my garage to a gym. And I kept a kettlebell under my desk at the University of Minnesota just to do maybe 2.5 very average sessions a week at on a good week.
Yeah.
Because I literally did not have physical time to go to the gym that was more than 5 minutes away. It just physically was just not possible. So, yeah, I agree. And related to back to the female training, what are your thoughts about all the stuff about fasted training? I've seen everything from women maybe should do more fasted training because there's some old literature I'm sure you're familiar with showing that as a percentage, maybe women do use fat a little bit better. I question some of that literature and how it was actually performed versus, oh my God, fasted training. That's the worst thing a woman should ever do. Like it's extremely catabolic. Don't do it. You're going to destroy all your gains.
Yeah, it's an interesting journey that we've gone on with fasted training, I think. Because I mean, I remember when people were so excited about it because, oh, acutely you're going to use more fat as fuel. And so therefore it's going to help with long-term fat loss. And therefore we should all be doing fasted cardio. And then we learned, that's actually not the case because those acute fat oxidation measures don't translate to long-term fat loss. So now I really understand why or where this fear mongering about fasted training for women came from. I don't think, well, I know there is really no merit to it because we have data in women doing fasted training, long term, short term. They their body composition changes are the same. They gain lean mass at the same, regardless of whether they do fed or fasted training. I think certainly if you're doing maybe a multi-hour long session or a really high intensity training or 2 a days or like for performance purposes, you could
Sure.
say, okay,
You're
maybe
really
this is
pushing the
something that,
envelope
but that's not for women. That's just
in
for
general.
athletes across the board. So I think it's damaging because it's misinformation. It it acts like when you wake up in the morning, your body just completely reset overnight. Like you're empty, you didn't eat the dinner the night before, there is no stored glycogen, we have no energy at all. And for people who want to train early in the morning, then some people don't want to eat breakfast first.
Yeah.
Some people have GI issues if they eat and then go straight to the gym, and all of that is fine. And so I don't know why people are putting this message out there when it just adds that one additional barrier when what we want to do is decrease the barriers for people to go to the gym.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that my biased opinion is if you can do fasted low to moderate intensity training, my bias is I would have people do that for a little bit more fat oxidation. Knowing is that the be all end all for fat loss? No, I think just training that system is probably better. Having said that, doing whatever exercise session you're going to do is by far and away like the biggest thing. And like you said, like you're still going to have stored muscle glycogen overnight, like your body, unless you're did too much Ambien and you're running laps around your house in the middle of the night or something, like you're not doing a lot of muscular work at night. You're going to burn through all your muscle glycogen. Like I have many clients who just get up in the morning. The only time they can physically do any training, even lifting and high intensity interval training, is in the morning. So
Yeah.
shocker, they do it in the morning. Maybe they have some coffee. Maybe we give them some essential amino acids. Maybe they don't. Again, is that session is going to be far superior than a session that they missed. And we can debate of all the little minor things at the end, but I agree that just making everyone afraid that their body is so fragile that it's going to completely fall apart if they don't have the perfect conditions, just I think is very demotivating and gets people to not do the things that we know are like incredibly beneficial.
I think there's also a lot of confusion with effects of low energy availability and training fasted or not eating immediately
Yes.
post workout because the narrative really sounds like muscle loss or menstrual cycle dysfunction or th things that are true in a true state of low energy availability long term or red S type situation, but very much not true when we're talking about one workout and a couple of hours around nutrient timing. And so it's unfortunate that I feel like there's this I don't know if it's intentional or not, but there seems like it's blended where you take a truth and twist it into something that really isn't relevant in the context of the conversation around nutrient timing.
Yeah. And explain low energy availability because that's something I don't see it as much in clients now as I did maybe 10, 12 ish years ago, but I still see it a fair amount. So do you want to explain a little bit of what that is? What are some of the hallmarks? What people should watch out for?
Yeah, so when we look at it, at least in the literature, it's quantified as how much you're taking in versus the energy you're expending from exercise relative to your lean mass. So it's a little bit complicated, but so it's not just being in a calorie deficit. It's really
Right.
how much exercise activity are we doing, and then are we fueling properly to support that. Unfortunately, those equations don't take habitual non-exercise activity into account,
Yeah.
and they should. They would be improved if they did. That said, if you think about an athlete who has pretty low body fat, either for athletic performance reasons or for like physique reasons, if you think about cyclists, gymnasts, figure skaters, dancers, these types of activities women are more susceptible as well because you're in some cases talking about people with not a lot of lean mass, who are potentially under fueling in order to stay at a low body weight or low body fat level, and probably are not prioritizing lifting because their sport doesn't really encourage it, even though probably everybody should. But historically, for female athletes, certainly it's not as though you aren't strong and muscular as a gymnast, but you are trying to maintain a really low level of body fat, and there's a cultural history there of weighing the athletes and a lot of toxic body image stuff. And the same goes with, we think, long distance runners or cyclists, and there's this advantage of being lighter because you perform better. So these are the people who are typically susceptible to this, and it's long term. It does have health decrements in all sorts of ways. It can affect all of your physiological systems. So you'll probably have trouble maintaining lean mass. You can see loss of menstrual cycle. You can see just general interruptions to things like immune function. So that's not good. We don't want to be there. But this is not a widespread problem for the average exerciser, I would say.
Yeah, I think of it as similar to overreaching or overtraining syndrome, which are two different things. Like for a while, overtraining comes up as this like big bugaboo, like, oh my God, watch out for this thing. And then you've got camps are like, it doesn't exist, to like, oh, if you train 4 sessions a week, you're going to get overtraining syndrome. And the reality is it's a real thing, but it's also relatively rare. If you have it, you're probably lying on the couch drooling on yourself, not really doing much of anything. Like you may
Yeah.
be overreached, you may have high levels of fatigue, you may not be recovering properly. But I think it's similar to that. I think now we've almost gone so far to the other extreme where we think that, oh, I had a low calorie day or I did fasting. Oh my God, my energy availability is going out the window, when that's looking more at a chronic thing that's happening over time, not these short acute bouts of stressors.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it becomes good. It's good to discuss these things to increase
For
awareness.
sure.
And so that was definitely true for kind of the overreaching stuff or high end volumes, and true for low energy availability, true for menstrual cycle and menopause. It's good to have these discussions and be really open about this and increase awareness. But with that allows people to introduce all of this fear or try to sell you something you don't need or make something that's like a unique problem or convince you that everybody has this problem. So that's it. That's the unfortunate double-edged sword between saying, hey, we should all be aware of this and talk about it, and then also not do it appropriately in context and say, and this is who needs to worry about this, and this is who doesn't.
Yeah. And it feels like everything online keeps getting shorter and shorter down to a 10-second freaking TikTok video, and nobody wants to talk about any context. So even when you're trying to get some information out about it, like the bandwidth feels like it's very short. So context is the first thing that just gets like thrown out the window then.
It's really hard because when you do try to provide that, then nobody looks at it.
Yeah.
So if you want a post that people pay attention to, it has to be suitable to our short attention span.
Yeah.
Um,
Speaking of suitable to short attention spans, I've heard now that women are not supposed to do cold water immersion. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or I can't find any data that it's based on. It seems to be back to this cortisol as this big bugaboo thing, and women are so susceptible to cortisol. And again, I can't find any data on that either.
Yeah, I think cortisol is another example of taking something that is a problem, chronically low, chronically
Sure.
high. These are health conditions, usually a symptom of a underlying condition that needs to be addressed. But that, and it's true that there are a host of issues that you might have if you do have chronically high cortisol, but that has been twisted and repackaged such that everyone is fearing increased cortisol either by skipping breakfast or with some sort of exercise. I can't do high intensity exercise because of cortisol, or I shouldn't have caffeine before the gym because of cortisol. When really these are
That's the one
just
I hate the most.
normal, like normal physiology, though. Like cortisol does a lot of good things and it's necessary and it's really well regulated in healthy people. So we don't need to think about it the same way that we don't need to worry about the glucose insulin response to a meal. That's a normal, necessary response to a meal. And so if we had to manually intervene to every single hormone fluctuation that occurs in response to every single thing we do, we would fall apart as a species. So it's good that our bodies are that our physiology is really well regulated like that, like this. The cold water immersion thing, the argument for why women shouldn't do it is, oh, well, when you get into cold water, you're going to start to shiver and your heart rate's going to go up. And I'm thinking, yeah, this isn't a normal physiological response to cold water. So
Hmm.
all of these things are supposed to happen because that we want that protection of core temperature, and that happens whether you're a man or a woman. I'm not that enthusiastic about the benefits of cold water immersion. I don't think they are very well established in either sex, at least not for recovery for the most. I think you could make the argument that people feel mental health benefits or clarity or some kind of they enjoy it for that reason. But when we actually look at the recovery benefits for most people, the data is pretty weak. So I don't really think we need to say everyone should be doing cold water immersion regardless, but I certainly don't think we need to scare people away from doing it if they're interested in trying it.
Yeah, I would agree. I pulled, I think, almost all the literature I could find on cold water immersion, and I do have a cert that does include it. But within that, I haven't found any difference between men or women. You could argue maybe it hasn't been studied that much. And then I do think the benefits for recovery are probably a little bit oversold. There is some stuff with a recovery of speed and power. There's some stuff in soccer players. There's other studies that show that it didn't really do much of anything either. And I think the part that's hard to filter out in some of these studies too is, did the athlete really like it or not? Because obviously that's going to contribute more to the placebo and nocebo effect. And I would be super curious if you just did air quotes a bias study of athletes who love cold water immersion and knowing that you're probably placeboing the utter crap out of them when you're doing the study, and then look at athletes who hate cold water immersion and have them both do the same protocol. I think that would be super interesting to see what happens, because I think some of it I think is also psychological as much as it is mental. And having done it a lot, I think that was for me the biggest benefit was, even after doing it almost every day for almost 2.5, 3 years in a row, I thought it would get to the point where it would be so easy, and it got easier. But every single time, even to this day, like right before I get into even just 44-degree water, I was like, I don't want to do this. This is stupid. What am I doing? This is dumb. Like, I still have to talk myself into it. But yeah, I would agree that definitely a lot more research is needed. I think it's interesting, but then we're taking a very limited research perspective and then expanding it out, saying one whole half the population shouldn't even do it seems crazy.
Yeah, and I think with a lot of these sort of recovery modalities, when it comes down to it, like I don't need more foam rolling research. I'm very comfortable saying if you
Yes.
like foam rolling, just foam roll. It's
Yeah.
not going to harm you. It's fine. It's probably not very beneficial. If you like to do it, if it makes you feel good, then great, and we can leave it at that. But I think a lot of those we just need to be cautious about things that are going to be really expensive or really time consuming. Then those, I think we need to be a bit less laissez-faire about whether we recommend them or not.
Yeah. And you could make an argument that recovery is becoming almost so sexy now that sometimes in some of these populations, I wonder, what the heck are you recovering from? Like, you train twice a week. Like, I get it, your lifestyle is stressful. So by all means, please do some down regulation, do some meditation. Like, yes, I think that's going to be incredibly beneficial. But do you need to pay $60 a time to go to cryo and a lot of these other things that have, I'd say, very mixed data at most? I don't know. Like I've lost clients in the past where I told them like your three fancy recovery days, just train two of them. And if you want to do some recovery stuff on an off day, great. But I think you're not getting the results you want because you're literally only training like twice a week. They didn't want to
No,
hear
I
that, but
agree because it's become this when you talk about all the things that you need to be paying attention to. It goes from your training variables to your training and nutrition to your training, nutrition, stress and sleep to your training, nutrition, stress and sleep and recovery. And then we have more of the recovery bucket
yeah.
than we do in like the training bucket. And if you're not training that hard, then you don't really need to worry about intentional recovery, especially if you are getting good sleep when you feel beat up. Like it's really obvious. And I think we need more people just training hard enough than we do with this sort of we're going to pretend that everyone is already training really hard and therefore needs multiple recovery days, fancy recovery modalities, a ton of supplements, or some complicated routine that is or the wearables like on top of that, right? So then you have you're tracking all these metrics and you're really worrying about, am I optimizing this and optimizing that, and I'm taking the supplement and I'm getting all the data, and then you're only training 2 days a week and it makes no sense.
Yeah, if I see one more biohacker proclaim that X peptide is what you need for mitochondrial biogenesis and adaptation, and then never talk about cardiovascular training, I'm going to scream.
Yeah, I see this too in the kind of sex-based difference camp discussions of a lot of the differences in fuel utilization for sure,
Yep.
and then also fiber type differences.
Yeah, that
And
was one of the questions I had for you about rep ranges and fiber types too, but I didn't want to interrupt you.
yeah, no, I think a lot of that discussion really ignores the clear difference between the brand new exerciser and the seasoned exerciser, because what we see is although there are these differences in untrained people, once people start exercising, regardless of whether it's resistance training or cardiovascular training, then they're going to start to get these adaptations that diminish the baseline sex differences. So, although it's interesting that those sex differences are there, if they start to diminish, then they shouldn't actually inform how we are training.
Yeah, so you wouldn't recommend women in general do any other specific rep range. You'd still recommend it's more driven by your goal and what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely, because what we first, I think the fiber type sex-based difference literature is weak. It's not non-existent, but it's weak because we're looking at one muscle, usually, one biopsy, usually, and one time point, usually.
Yeah,
And
it's
that,
usually VMO because rarely do you see a biopsy from any other muscle.
right. So, what does that mean? Because then we look at the elite endurance athlete, marathon runner, and we look at their fiber type distribution, and we compare that to the elite Olympic weightlifter, and those are very different. Why are they different? Because they're training really differently. So, the idea that but let's, for argument's sake, let's say there's a difference. It's 55%, 45%. Why are we trying to correct that? Is there something
Yeah.
better about 45 and 55 or 50 and 50 or 60 and 40? What are we actually concerned about? Because ultimately it's about performance differences. Those are going to A, help you perform better, and B, once you do that performance, those are going to facilitate the adaptations. So I don't understand the logic behind it, not to mention the fact that almost nobody will ever have an understanding of their particular
No.
fiber type distribution. And so it's not something you can ever track. So training to change something you can't track doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, and like you said, I think a glaring weakness is it's almost all from VMO literature. Like, so the one quad outside quad muscle, because that's the only thing we generally biopsy. So
Yeah.
even if it were true, even if you had, let's say, a 20% difference, but you're training to be an Olympic weightlifter, I don't think I'd use any of that data because that's only one muscle. And even if it was, let's say that distribution maps to your whole body, which probably doesn't, but I don't have any other data to say would I train you different for this outcome to be like highly explosive in these two lifts. Like I don't know if I would even train you any different based on that.
And when it comes to overall health, it's not like because of the fiber type differences, the marathon runner and the Olympic weightlifter are incredibly unhealthy because of their
Right.
skewed distribution. Like you could never make that argument. It doesn't make, they just have different muscular adaptations. But when we actually look at biopsies in people who are ill, it's not like they have a fiber type distribution that's skewed one way or another. They actually end up having a lot of hybrid fibers. And so we could say
Mm-hmm.
those are probably not good for health. But in order to transition the hybrid fibers, you just need to do any exercise at all. So I think this narrative that, oh, all women as they age need to be doing like 5x5s, and because the higher rep ranges aren't going to work anymore, and we really need to be targeting the type 2 fibers, none of it makes sense to me, especially because that argument is to say if you want to age well, if you want better overall health, it's a narrative that sells very well, but when you actually dig into the underlying data, we don't have evidence to make that recommendation for any reason. And like I said, it's not a practical one because you're making a ton of assumptions and then restricting how people are lifting based on a poor set of underlying assumptions. So when you say, oh, well, you're 55, so you should only be doing 5x5 squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press. Good luck getting the vast majority of 55-year-old women to do that.
Yeah, and I just see huge differences with even subpopulations in lifting, right? So if you compare Olympic weightlifter to high level competitive rowers, like rowers are notorious for doing crazy amount of reps at 90% of their 1RM. Like most high level Olympic weightlifters are not doing a ton of reps at 90% of their 1RM. But
Yeah.
again, those are trained for two specifically completely different outputs, even though they're both strength sports. So I think it's like you said, the training you're doing and the goal you're trying to achieve more so than anything else.
Yeah, and it's another example of stuff we may or may not care about or find interesting in these really elite athletes, for which, by the way, we don't actually know if they're elite because they had some different fiber type distribution that was advantageous pre training to be an elite
Sure.
athlete, or if it was just training induced, and probably it was a combination of both, along with so many other factors. But that's a fun, interesting conversation that is not at all actionable for the average person. And I think it really is important to understand who we're talking to and clarify that because there's so much mixed messaging right now, such that everybody thinks that they need to behave like the elite athlete when a lot of people just want some basic exercise information.
Yeah. I think of it as some of the early genetic testing. And again, it's not to say that genetics don't have a factor at all. It's, yeah, maybe if you're going to want to be an elite sprinter, you don't have an ACTN3 gene. Yeah, your odds are probably stacked against you. But if somebody came to me and didn't have the right genetics for it and said, I want to run faster in college, and they're identical or their brother or whatever does or sister has that gene, I don't have any data to say how would I train them any different if they both want to run 100 meters faster. Like, so again, it's not to say that there isn't differences. There probably are. There clearly is, at least in that one marker, but we don't even know how to make any of that data actionable now if someone is still training for the same thing. So I think that's where it gets really confusing.
Plus, even if somebody has better genetics, if they don't have the work ethic,
Yeah, they don't do anything. Doesn't matter.
like so it matters. Obviously, genetics matters as well, but and
Sure.
that's why you see there are some high level athletes who are lazy. But or at least they get away with a lot of stuff that the people who are maybe not as genetically gifted don't get away with. So it's not to say that even if you aren't gifted the perfect genetic lottery, you can't go far.
Sure.
Look at
Yeah.
Eric
Like even
Helms.
shout out to Eric. Yeah, it's just crazy how the elite of the elite are so freakier than what people realize. And even within them, there are, I would say, the elite of the elite that have the genetics, that have the work ethic, that have everything. And they're usually the top people in professional sports. Like, I think people would be surprised at the average in elite sports, how little some of them train and how poor some of their nutrition actually is. And it's not everyone, but those people definitely do exist for sure.
Yeah, because you just find yourself in high school and you end up being good at it, and then you get a scholarship, and you never, not to say that they don't end up working hard, but it is a hard pill to swallow for the folks who are really doing everything they can, and we're just never going to be them.
Yeah, definitely. So as we get closer to wrapping up here, is there any other couple sort of myths or things that you see touted for women's fitness that you wanted to address?
I guess just women specific supplements I'm seeing a lot of. The
Yeah, I
way
feel like
that
that's the next trend, unfortunately.
Yeah, we see something like creatine, which has been around forever, and it's as if it's the like newly discovered thing for women. I'm like, what's happening?
Yeah,
Um, so, and also being really overhyped because, yeah, creatine works, but let's define what works means, and you're not going to get these mind-blowing results. You're going to get results that may or may not be even noticeable. And that's okay. It's safe, it's fairly inexpensive. But to say if you are a woman, you should be taking it regardless of whether you're exercising because there's some kind of unique rebrand to creatine. And companies that are doubling the price and putting it in pink packaging and
yeah,
selling
that's
it
my
to
pet peeve.
women, like,
It's the same
yeah,
thing.
it's the
It's
exact same
literally
thing.
the same thing.
Like, or making it a gummy and selling that
Mm-hmm.
because that's more appealing to. So it really contributes to the focus on the wrong things because everyone is so interested in supplements always. And so whenever you say every woman needs to take this, then you're gonna get everybody's attention diverted that way. And we need to be pushing fewer supplements and training harder.
So you're saying women don't need a special kind of creatine to reduce bloating? That one seems to be showing up once again and has been floating around for, God, as long as I've been in the industry, 20, 25 years, it seems like, since creatine basically came out.
I think the ingredient for the anti-bloating is like a dandelion root.
Yeah, in some formulas, they'll put a basically a weak diuretic in it.
Right.
Oh,
Which like we like let's not take that on a daily basis. I
yeah.
think it's and it's also not going to magically grow your glutes or reduce cellulite. No, it's not doing those things.
Yeah, I saw, and this is probably still marketed, the creatine HCl was better because it's not bloating for women. And there's like no data on that. There's like, I think, two studies that show it might be equivalent to creatine monohydrate, but it's back to the supplement thing of like people are trying to solve all these existing issues with creatine. They're just not existing. You're probably old enough to remember the old creatine ethyl ester. And their ad was they dissolved it in a glass of water and they showed that it went into solution. And then they put creatine monohydrate in there and didn't mix it at all and saw it like sank to the bottom. And they're like, oh, this is why you need this new type of creatine. Look at how bioavailable it is. You're like, no, you're not showing any bioavailability. You're just showing solubility, that it goes
Yeah.
into water. And then you talk to, rest in peace, like guys like Roger Harris, who's like the godfather of creatine. And he's like, yeah, if it turns out the body cleaved it at a different spot, it would have been incredibly toxic. But we got lucky and that it just cleaved the two apart and nothing really bad happened. And turns out it's not more effective. It's probably less effective. And creatine is incredibly bioavailability. So it's very high. So you're trying to solve an issue that there wasn't an issue to begin with, just to try to sell something else. It's paradoxically inferior. So it's maddening.
Right. Instead of just saying, oh, you don't like it because it's clumpy. Like,
Right.
this one is less clumpy. Because that's all it means. It's
That's
going to
not
be more
sexy.
pleasant to drink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's interesting too, because there's this narrative that because women have 20 to 30% lower creatine synthesis, then they need creatine supplementation even more than men. But the original data on this is just over and over misrepresented, because what they found was, yes, endogenous creatine synthesis was lower, but intramuscular creatine stores, which is what we actually care about if we're talking about supplementation, was higher, which makes sense because on average, women have less muscle. So
Right.
they're like, actually, you could make the opposite argument that women are going to have less of a benefit, because if your cup is already three-quarters of the way full, then you're only getting that much extra from the supplementation because you have less muscle. So it's just a really disingenuous marketing tactic that's wrapped in scientific tissue paper, which is just a great metaphor for so much of what's happening on the internet these days.
Yeah. And that's what's so hard too, because like that was a real study. And yes, that was a real finding. But again, I sound like some old get off my lawn type person now, maybe because I am old, but uh, I used to think no one read full studies. Now I'm like, I don't think anyone even reads abstracts anymore. Like, I think they might look at the conclusion and be like, oh, see, I found the study. This is true. But like you said, if you read the study, that's not what it actually showed. Like, now you're just cherry picking one line out of the study that AI put up on a screen that may not even be a real study anymore. So,
And that has been mis cited essentially
yep.
in so many reviews at this point, that like no one even knows where the original study came from, because everyone's just citing these reviews over and over again. So when I was first digging into it, it took me a while to be like, where did this come from? And you look and they're citing a different review. Where did that come from? And you look and they're citing, and so you have to
Yep.
go multi
All the
layers
way
deep
back.
to finally find where this came from. And certainly if like, I'm gonna do that because I want to know, but and then you find that it's you don't have access to it because it's really old, and then you have to
Yeah.
dig. But
They want
the average person's
$75 for
not gonna do
24-hour
that.
access.
Yeah. You're
Yeah,
looking for like the scanned version of the PDF.
my new pet peeve is I if you're quoting a specific, I'll say fact or thing, you shouldn't be able to quote a review. Like that's my pet
No.
peeve when I'm looking at peer review of stuff. Like, and I admit that I'm probably not the best at always picking those up 100%, but you should go back to the actual study of where it was actually done, because like you said, a lot of times it's a quoting of a review that quotes another review that quotes another review, and it's like, oh, so nobody caught this like the entire time, and then it takes forever to trace it all the way back to something published in 1996 that's behind the paywall for $110. You're like, oh Christ.
And I think it's one thing if we're going to make a very well established claim, like resistance training increases muscle size and strength.
Oh,
Fine.
totally. Yeah, that's
Like
fine. Yeah.
muscle mass declines with age. Like that kind of thing, fine. We can cite reviews for that. But when you're making a niche claim, especially putting a number on it, then
Yep.
you need the original data.
Yeah. Yeah. Last question, I'll wrap up. Do you think it's getting better in terms of looking at more gender specific women versus men in terms of resistance training and even nutrition? Like I feel like there's more studies coming out in this area, which is great. And that we're finally getting more data, which is amazing. But I think the average person doesn't realize how long it takes from when you have an idea of a study to actually seeing said study in peer review in a published thing and then having to get it distributed to the masses.
Yeah, it's especially hard with something like menopause because you have people who go through the menopause transition at different rates for different lengths of time and experience drastically different hormone fluctuations during different windows, maybe for a week, maybe for a couple weeks, maybe for a couple days. And when we're doing a study, we're trying to standardize everything. And that's the opposite of what we want in terms of standardization. And so I know there's a lot of frustration about the lack of data in women who are perimenopausal, but that is a major challenge going into this because it's really difficult to recruit a homogeneous or as homogeneous as you can get a sample. And as you said, studies take a lot of time and people are really impatient. But I think there's a narrative out there that we have no data in women, and that's
Uh,
often a
which is not
message
true.
that is used to say, and therefore I'm going to make a claim that has no evidence behind it at all and take my word for it because we have no evidence in women. So what people need to be aware of is certainly in the past 10, 15 years, we've done a lot of work in women as a field. And more and more recently have the menstrual cycle research, the oral contraceptive stuff, that's been more targeted. But if you think about overall studies that were maybe traditionally done in men were replicated in women, looking at the training variables like volume, frequency, intensity, so and certainly nutritional parameters as well, like dietary protein intake, fasting, all of these types of studies that were maybe done at first in men have been replicated in women. And time again, we see very similar results. So, more, I am today more convinced than ever before that we are more similar than different as like all men and all women. Certainly that we are different as individuals in how we respond, but that always is going to come down to training yourself or working with a client and training that individual. No study is ever going to tell every individual exactly how to eat or train.
Yeah. And I've noticed sometimes, and again, maybe it's just the handful of studies I've seen. If you go back and read some of the studies from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which I told some people I was teaching a year ago that I found a study from 1995, and they're like, oh my God, that's ancient. What are you talking about? I'm like, it's not that old. But if you read them, there was some studies you'll find that had like half men, half women. Sometimes there's a big enough standard deviation between them, or you can maybe parse some things out. And so again, like you said, there is some data there. It's definitely not the norm, but it's not like we have zero data, which that's also not true.
And I think it's actually really promising that we're seeing more and more studies come out showing no effect of menstrual cycle or oral contraceptives on various outcomes because what that means is it decreases the barrier for more labs to study women. For years, it's been like, well, I don't want to worry about tracking or controlling for the menstrual cycle or measuring hormones, or I don't have the resources for that. So I'm just going to study men. And if that's no longer necessary, then I think it's really exciting because now there's no need to control for all of those things. And smaller labs don't have to worry about it because when they go to publish, the journal doesn't get to say, well, you didn't control for the menstrual cycle.
Yeah, I did that when I published my energy drink study. I had to basically cite earlier research showing that with at least with caffeine, there was no gender difference. So we ended up using half males, half women. So we had it split, and it was easier because we didn't have to control for it. But my thing was, I wanted to try to have at least more representative population of what it was going to be applied to. And if I just exclude all women from the study, then, well, that's not really the population at hand either. But I got lucky because there was previous research that allowed me to do that. So in some areas, in some niches, it sometimes is easier to get a half and half population than other areas.
Yeah, I think given the various limitations that we already accept with so much research in this field, things like training status, you're never getting a sample of equally trained people.
No.
Or for tracking diet, let's just get a 3-day food log pre and post from everybody. We know that that is problematic or at least imperfect. And we just accept that. Or same thing with saying men ages 18 to 30. An 18-year-old and a 30-year-old are different in many ways. So
Yep.
we accept all of that as it is variability, it is what it is. And so I'm not sure why we aren't approaching some of these potential sex-based differences or cycle differences in the same way that would just allow us to get more data, because just exclusion and a lack of data clearly isn't the best answer.
Yeah. And as you know, if you get so rigid on trying to control absolutely everything, you could argue you have very little external validation or reliability. Like it doesn't transfer to any other population once you get the results. And then two, shocker, you have to complete the study and not have a huge, massive dropout. And if you make their life a living hell for like $10 a day, if you even pay them, and like half your study like just disappears on week 3, you're screwed. And now you have absolutely nothing.
Right. Now you have a study with 5 people and
Yeah,
everyone's going to
5
criticize
people.
you for your small
Yeah,
sample
which you're never
size.
going to get published unless you say it's a pilot data, and then no journal wants that. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I just had 3 rapid fire questions for you. What would you say is your favorite lift to do in the gym?
Walking lunges at the moment.
Oh, wow. I would have not, that is not a fun one at all.
Yeah.
Favorite food?
A lobster roll.
Oh, okay. Good. And then favorite recreational activity?
Hiking with my dogs.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Awesome. Where can people find out more information about you? Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This was great.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You can go to drlaurencs.com, or I'm Dr. Lauren CS1 on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to put all those links in there. And thank you so much. I really appreciate all your time. That was great. Thank you
Thank
again.
you.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Huge thanks to Dr. Lauren for coming on and dispelling all the crazy myths about women's fitness using actual research. If you enjoyed this podcast, please send it over to a friend, post it online. Please tag both of us so we can say thank you, and hit the old algorithm, subscribe, like, share. If you've got a few moments, leave us a comment or review. It goes a huge way to helping us with a better distribution of the podcast. So hopefully we can drown out a lot of the poor and misinformation out there, because it is extremely annoying to see people who are putting, in this case, women who are putting in the time and effort, but just have the wrong information. So they're doing all the things they should be doing, but they're going in the wrong direction. They're putting the time and effort in, but not seeing the results that they deserve. Anything else for me, you can hop on to the newsletter. Insider newsletter is where most of my content goes out, and it's completely free. Go to MikeTNelson.com and go to the newsletter link. You'll be able to hop on there completely free. Check out our sponsors, our friends over at Element. Again, today I was drinking the watermelon flavor, which I really enjoy. And we were down in South Padre. I bought some of the canned versions of Element also. And that was super handy, especially to go kiteboarding. Normally I would fill up a couple containers, and then I would toss a few extras of those in my cooler just in case. And then if you're looking for a cable attachment where you can do all sorts of fun stuff, from isometrics to heavy eccentrics, even isokinetic training. You can do a virtual chains mode, inverse chains, all sorts of great stuff. Check out our friends over at Beyond Power with the Vultra One device. As I said in the intro, I've been back home, so I've been able to use it and really, really like it. I'm working on, since I'm getting ready for a snowboard trip coming up in a few weeks, so started doing some eccentric overload belt squats on it. So that's the next project with the Vultra One. So check it out below. I am an affiliate for them, but I've been super impressed by the device and Elliot and everybody over there at Beyond Power. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you listening, and anything I can do for you, hit me up via the newsletter for reply. I'll talk to all of you next week.
Hey, what are you doing? I dropped my gum. Hey, lady, would you toss my gum up? You could have taken it out of the wig first.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.